Hello, thank you for joining me for the 4th day of November of the 30-day of November live video challenge that I'm doing. And today I'm going to be talking with you about open enrollment and more specifically the health plans that you may have to choose from. If you only have one health plan, obviously that's going to be pretty easy and straightforward. You don't really have any choice there. Besides maybe just going to the open market and deciding if that's going to make sense. Most of the time that's not the case as long as your employer's providing some types of subsidy to kind of help offset that. But where it really starts to get tricky is when you have 2, 3, 4, I've seen as many as 5 different plans sometimes that you have to choose from. And I'm going to give you a couple of tips and tricks to just narrow in on what's going to be the most impactful way to analyze this, probably save you some time and help you reduce the guesswork that has to do with it. So there's one thing I always like to know and be aware of and share with my clients, and that is the guaranteed cost that we know you're going to pay. Usually this is also the best case scenario because it's the premiums only. So whatever you pay monthly or per paycheck, multiply that over the course of the full year that you're going to be working. And that's going to be your kind of guaranteed amount that you know you're going to pay. And that may help you figure it out really quickly as far as what that range can be. And that's usually the best case scenario to when you kind of run a best case scenario for all these multiple health plans. Usually the best case scenario is you don't use the health insurance at all. You'd only pay for the benefits. And if you get the kind of check-ins and things like that as just kind of complimentary and part of the insurance package, don't have to pay co-pays, don't have to pay for those visits, then that's usually the best case scenario is all you pay is the premiums. But what happens is most of the time you do have these different things that come up throughout the year and you need to know how that's going to factor in. And those things start to apply towards what's called a deductible. I'm not going to go into all the nitty-gritty details of all these things, but this is a very important part of your health plan options and how you're going to analyze these things. So the deductible is super important for most of the health insurance, and it varies by the insurance plans. If you change employers or if your employer even just has changed the plans that you have available from the previous year, things could be drastically different from plan to plan. And so you want to know what that deductible is and when does it apply? Does it apply immediately? Does every single part of the expense automatically start applying towards a deductible, which means you're paying that all basically. And usually what happens is once you get to the deductible and cover that, then you start paying what's called coinsurance. So those are important numbers, and coinsurance ends up being a percentage where if you go over the deductible and there's still more expenses to be paid, you have a share that you're going to pay, and then the insurance is going to pay a portion of that. So usually it takes a while before you get to that point, especially for most people that have a high deductible health plan. And that's really important to be aware of. The next big thing that I like to be aware of too is kind of worst case scenario. Like if things hit the fan, multiple people in your family, or even if you're an individual, you have $50,000 or $100,000 worth of medical bills all of a sudden for a year. What's the most that you're ever going to see out of pocket? So you can quickly analyze that because it's usually provided for you. It's max out of pocket. It's stated there. And so you know that's kind of the worst case scenario. You want to add that to your premiums because that doesn't factor in your premiums. And so that's really the worst case out of pocket between your paycheck and what you're actually going to pay in medical bills. So I'd like to see best case scenario, what those guaranteed premiums are. I like to see worst case scenario. Those are kind of the outer edges and really easy to calculate because they're right there for you. Where it starts to get a little bit tricky is figuring out, well, what's all this in between? Which plan makes sense if you're somewhere in between those maximum extremes? And what you can do is you can run a few different analyses. Usually what I do is I do like a low usage, medium usage, and high usage. And basically what you do is you run that against the deductible, then you start to apply the coinsurance. Where it starts to get a little bit tricky and more advanced, and most employers, I've never seen an employer actually help you with this part of that calculation. If you have a high deductible health plan, there's these great accounts called health savings accounts, and any contributions you make into that reduce your taxes. And so if you happen to be in like the 22%, 24% bracket, any contributions you make in there actually reduces the cost overall for you because it's going to reduce the cost of your taxes. So that's something you do want to factor in. That's one thing where a lot of people just don't realize that. They think that if they're going to pay $5,000 in medical expenses, even if they have the high deductible health plan, that's just what the cost is. Well, if you fund a health savings account with $5,000 and you're paying 22% in your tax bracket, that's going to save you, I'll just do the math just to make sure I'm not making things up here. that is going to save you $100 in taxes. So that actually reduces the overall cost of what you're comparing to these other plans. So if you're comparing this to a plan that doesn't have that high deductible in that HSA option, well, you need to factor in that tax savings. And a lot of times that could start to move the HSA to be really a better plan for you and your situation. It really depends on a few other things too. How often do you go to the doctors, how much medications you use, what types of medications. Those are things where it really gets nitty gritty. Sometimes you do have to just start picking up the phone call and say, hey, I have this medication. There's really no way around it. What is this going to cost if I go on this plan? Okay, you're the same insurance carrier for this other plan too. What if I'm on this plan and I go for it? What's the cost? Sometimes you do have to get into that grade of detail when you know that there's certain things that exist. Another time where it's easy to help choose these things is my wife just had our third child this year, and we knew that going into the year. So we knew that we had this huge major expense coming up, and then we were able to run like, okay, we're going to be relatively high usage. We estimated about $8,000 of costs that we'd have to pay ourselves. And so we were able to run this against the multiple plans because we've already had children before. We knew roughly what that cost was going to be to us. And then we were able to use that number because we could reasonably predict that, yep, this is going to occur in 2020. So we're able to do those things. So if you have any major medical surgeries coming up, anything that you know is going to happen in 2021, definitely factor that in. That could change. That could be a reason to change your plan from what it was previously. And it may mean that you only change it for 2021, and then maybe 2022 you think is going to be a quiet year. You can actually change your plan again for that new year. So hopefully that's helpful. Those are really the big things I take a look at. So what's the guaranteed amount you have to pay? What's the worst case scenario? And then I start to factor in all these different ranges. I do that low usage, medium usage, and slightly high usage. And that will give you a good estimate, especially if you have that high deductible health plan and you start to factor in that tax benefits, how those calculations are going to play out. And then it makes it a lot more easy to compare. Instead of it just being like, I have no clue how any of this works, you start to get these numbers and ranges. And one of the ones, I'll just kind of give you an example of one I was working on today, kind of my inspiration for this video. I'm not going to share the screen because it's going to have client details on it, but I'll just kind of read you off some of the comparisons. They have 4 different plans, and basically their guaranteed kind of premium cost varied from $4,320 a year to $11,916 for the most expensive plan. And if we started to look at some of let's just kind of look at the medium case scenario, then their high deductible health plan was actually be best for them because the total cost between their premiums and what they're expected to use. And I was using an example of $7,000 for their specific plan. Again, the co-insurance, deductibles, these are all going to vary. So this isn't going to mean it's the same numbers for you. But for these plans and how those things operated, the example I was using was $7,000 in medical expenses for their family. So the total cost I was expecting for them for one of their plans was $7,284. And then I kind of color coded it for them to make it easier for them to decide. As you moved up in the plans, the more expensive plans, the next plan would have been $7,620 for that amount of usage. And they have a gold plan, that would have been the next one. That one would have been $11,696. Then there's that more expensive plan that luckily, as those expenses go up, that you don't have to worry about that as much on that more expensive plan. It's more predictable. The problem is you're guaranteed that you're going to pay a lot of money with this particular option that they had there. So hopefully that's helpful to you just to see how much that could range. They had 4 different options, and those costs varied pretty substantially. That was just using a $7,000 estimate. Also did a $3,000 and a $20,000. And for those things, it does move around. Well, what's going to be the best plan in that situation? But we're able to look at historical things as well as some of the predictable things that we know is coming up for them. And hopefully that's going to help them have more informed decision as far as how these things operate and how it's going to work best for them this next coming year. Then, yeah, if you figure this all out this year, I help my clients figure this all out, and then everything can change next year with new plans and new open enrollment. You change employers. So keep that in the back of your mind that just because you make an awesome, perfect decision based off of everything for 2021 that can all flip. That doesn't mean it's always going to be the perfect plan. So this is something you do want to revisit every single year to make sure that your situation hasn't changed to a point where it no longer makes sense to go with this one plan. You might be able to save $1,000 or expect to save $1,000 more by switching your plan potentially. So you just want to keep an eye on those things. Hopefully that was helpful. If you have any in-depth questions, or if you have any questions that you want me to tackle on these next 26 days of this challenge, definitely let me know. I'll record those. I'm going to try to make them all between 5 to 10 minutes to make sure I don't talk too long, so people can jump in and actually get some valuable details, but they don't have to stick around for a whole episode of what would be my podcast traditionally, or just a webinar or workshop that would be like almost an hour. So hopefully these fast, quick details are helpful. Go back and listen to the full recording if you didn't catch it all, but also let me know if you have additional questions, because I can tackle them on future challenge days. So thanks for joining me, and have a great night. I don't know who's going to win this election. It's been an entertaining thing. Definitely everyone's on edge. I think most of the people I know feel pretty strongly one way or another about this, and as well as my wife and I. And so it'll be interesting to see kind of how things play out, but hopefully everyone is taking care of themselves, their mental health, and doing some self-care. Hopefully not the expensive version, because I'm a financial planner, right? You want to be practical. You don't want to break the bank and all of a sudden be stressed out about the situation you put yourself in because of the self-care that you get addicted to, or something like that. So just make sure it makes sense for you, but definitely make sure you do it. And there's a lot of free things too, right? You can work out, you can go for a walk. You can talk to someone. Lots of free ways that it does. Self-care doesn't always have to be going online and spending stuff, or going out and shopping and things like that. So hopefully that's just a free quick tip for you. And I'll tackle some more kind of tips for maybe the holidays and buying gifts and things like that over these next few days as well. So reach out if there's anything specific you want me to tackle.